Hey guys, welcome back. Today I got some new fuel parts from Flyin Miata, so we're gonna go ahead and throw those on. All right, so before we hop into this, I'm gonna do a little rundown of the parts I got. So here I have Flyin Miata's dual feed radium fuel rail, nice and pretty. And along with that was a bunch of AN fittings because the feed side will be all this, at least from the lines in the bay up. And then fuel pressure regulator adapter because I will be using the stock one, at least for now. And then some odds and ends and some fuel line for the return. And of course, this would be useless without injectors. So here I have some DW 1000cc injectors, which is one of the reasons why I went with a bigger fuel rail. I don't want it to get choked out, you know. And I would like to have even pressure on the fuel rail because bad fueling can make your motor explode. Ask me how I know. Yeah, I think that's basically everything we're working with today. Install should be fairly straightforward, but there will be a couple things that can get messed up, or just things that'll make it easier if you're doing this yourself. Because the first time I had to work with fuel was replacing injectors, and it was a pain. Let me tell you, was not a fan. Still not a fan, but got to do it. So prep for this is pretty easy. You basically want to clean out everything in this area. Right here is where the stock fuel rail will sit. Luckily, I just had this motor built, so there's not much hooked up. I am actually going to take off the intake manifold, that way you guys can get a better view. And really, this is what's going to get in the way. Anyways, it's not sealed up, so I'm going to go ahead and take that off, and we'll get into it. Always a good idea to throw the nuts back onto whatever stud or bolt that they originally came from. That way when you go to reinstall parts, you know, it's already there, like this one here and a couple over there. Just easy way to keep track of them, and it sucks when you're going to put something together and you got one bolt or one nut that you're missing. All right, so before we install the fuel rail onto the car, we're actually do a couple things to prep it. First things first, I'm gonna spray this out with brake cleaner, just to make sure there's no like packing material or any bugs that crawled in there, because you don't really want that clogging up your injectors. That's a recipe for a bad day. So clean that, that'll dry up in a second. And the second step is going to be installing any fittings that need to be on here. So for me, it'll be two 90-degree angles coming off each side for the feed, and then this one fuel pressure regulator adapter up here. And these are all NTP threads, so we'll go over that in a second. You just don't want to over tighten those because you can either split the rail or it'll just strip, and it's a headache. But for me, anything oil or fuel related, when it comes to sealing, I use, instead of using the tape sealant, I use the paste. This, if it does get swallowed or just, if it does get sucked into your system, this will kind of flow and not clog anything, whereas the tape will kind of bunch up. So this is always good to have. I prefer using this anyways. I feel like it seals better. So I'm going to start off by putting a little bit on this fuel pressure regulator adapter. This is so I can use a stock fuel pressure regulator. Put a little bit on here. And this doesn't even really need to be that tight. It actually isn't even like a hex on it to put a tool or anything, but that's just going to go right here. Get that started. You also want to make sure too, because on the stock one, it mounts this way, so you want to get it tight just enough to where it's about here. I kind of want to go another half turn. I don't know. I feel like I want to go another half turn. But now it's stuck here. Let me see if I can get it like that at least. So I'm not trying to mount mine like this. I don't remember what it looked like stock. I thought it was this way. But this is as tight as I want to go, because if I start trying to crank it another quarter turn, it might just split the rail or split the fitting, which is not fun. So I'm going to leave that here for now. I might adjust that later. And then we have these two 90-degree fittings for the ends. I'll put a little bit of this on there. Alright, so we got all of these fittings on. This one I still might have to mess with, like I said. But the way these work is you can swivel them after they're tightened. So those can be adjusted once they get the lines on. But now it's mounting time. So you're not going to need the stock bolts anymore, because they give you some Allen bolts that fit inside of this little groove on the fuel rail a little bit better. I think you still need these spacers though. That I'm not 100% sure on. I'm going to try and install them with the spacer. And if the injectors don't see it or it's obvious that it's not going to line up, then I'll take them out. It's not a big deal. But let me grab those new bolts real quick. Alright, so here's the 3 new bolts. I'm just going to leave these in here for now, because I actually still need to get the injectors seated in the rail. And there is a nice trick for getting that done right, because busting the O seal on the injectors is very easy to do, and you might not even know you've done it until you're trying to start the car. Ask me how I know. So let me grab those real quick. Alright, so I got my injectors out. Basically what they look like. They actually sent me this lube to use when installing these seals, which is really nice, because I was just going to use oil. But this is, if they supply it, I'm assuming it's better. This is important because 2 things. Like I said before, these O-rings right here, this is where it sits on the fuel rail. These are very brittle, especially if you're using stock injectors or older injectors from another car, like maybe RX-7 injectors, RX-8 injectors. Super hard to break, and to replace them you got to buy a full new kit for the injector, which is just a real pain. These can be kind of hard to see too. They want to go in crooked, they want to get stuck up top in the portholes here. So having either oil or some lube like this is really important. It's going to make it a lot easier to install. Now these are 1000cc injectors, so they came with a flow rate. It's on this paper here. It's probably not too important to you. But there are certain injectors I want to go with certain cylinders. So I'm just going to time lapse this. It's going to take me a second to find out or figure out, just because the numbers are small. Alright, so I'm going to show you guys for the last one. All I'm doing is basically just getting a couple dabs on this top seal, and then spreading it on this bottom one for the port. Top one is kind of hard to spread, so I kind of just like tapped it around. Bottom one, you can get on all the surfaces down there. Now, something that's different than stock that I didn't know until about a minute ago. The stock fuel rail injectors will normally just slide in, and this O-ring up here seals it. It's a pretty easy fit. It's just trying to get it lined up with these that makes it hard, trying to do it at the same time. But with this fuel rail, this is going into number 3. The first one I did actually took a decent amount of force, and it kind of pops into place, which is why the lube is really important, because if you pop it into place and that seal isn't going into where it's supposed to go, it's gonna break immediately. So the first one was a little bit hard, then I started adding more grease, and they all went in fairly easy. Now for, I think it's 94 and up motors, we're gonna use the upper mounting hole on this fuel rail. I'm not sure if you can see. We're gonna put these spacers back on. Actually, I'm just gonna set them right here. And for just getting this on, I'm just gonna do it by hand. All right, so I know this will be a little bit hard to see. I'll try not to block it with my arm. But this is basically what we're doing. Having the intake manifold off makes this a lot easier. All right, so everything's kind of sitting where it needs to be. I'm gonna tighten this first one just so it's stuff doesn't start to fall out on you. You don't want to lose those spacers. They're important and they're hard to find when you do lose them. Alright, so see if I get it. Wow, I'm going to give it a little bit of a push. Watch those seals, make sure one of them isn't popping out or acting weird. Alright, so that one's in. Now it feels like they're in. I think they need to go a little bit further though. I feel like they need to kind of pop in. Like that first one did. Now let's tighten these up and see if maybe once they're tight, it'll kind of press them in. Alright, so I was actually about to do this when I remembered an old trick that I did last time I had to install some injectors. So what I did is I took the little rubber piece off the port side of these injectors. They're right in here. And they're a lot easier to press in by hand, and that way you can make sure they're fully seated, like that one wasn't. Alright, so those are fully in there, and now all we have to do is slide this little nozzle into the seal, which is a lot easier than trying to push the entire thing in at once. So the bolts are lined up. Now just be careful with the head of those injectors. Kind of have to feed them in one by one while trying to keep them in line. Now that they're in, a little push. All right, this one's not wanting to go in. What's going on here? There we go. Yep, fully seated. We heard it pop into place. All the seals are evenly flush with the head, as you can see there. Nothing poking out. So not the easiest thing to do, but also not the hardest, as long as you take your time and do it right. So I'm gonna go ahead and get these tight. Now, another way to check that everything is seated properly and you haven't broken anything is that you should be able to spin these injectors fairly easy. You should feel like there's some resistance, but not anything that's binding or stuck. So as you can see, these move fairly easy, but they're not spinning freely. And that's how we know they're seated correctly. And I think these actually need to be pointing up, if I remember correctly, with the stock harness. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. All right, so the last step would be to hook up these two stainless steel lines to this T-joint, because you gotta remember in the NA engine bay, you have one hard line that's a feed line. That's gonna go to here, split it. That way both sides of the rail can get fed fuel, and then it'll be returned through the fuel pressure regulator here, back to the stock hard line in the engine bay. So there's a couple more things I could do here, but I still need this motor fairly taken apart because I have some other parts I'm planning to put on. Later today I might start doing the oil cooler, which is going to come out where the oil filter is here. There's a whole adapter. That's a whole thing. I'll make a video on that. But as far as hooking up this fuel rail and the injectors, this is basically it. Hopefully you learned something. If not, maybe I entertained you. But either way, we appreciate your support. We're trying to get this channel up and running again. It's been hard with the schedule we've all been on for this whole COVID pandemic. I've been on night shift, LJ's been on day shift, Josh has been on night shift with me, but it's been hard to see people, especially since we're supposed to be social distancing and all that. So, but either way, we'll try and crank out some videos for you guys. We want to make them. It's just finding the time, and yeah, it's really about finding the time. But we appreciate your support. And come back next time for another video.